I've also committed, Emily, to only have one budget a year. The last government kept coming back every few months with another budget, another fiscal event, another mini budget, and picking the pockets of people every time. I don't want to do that.
Chancellor, the last time we were here with you at the Treasury, it was just after you'd won the election, we squeezed out of you that taxes would have to rise. You've been true to your word that taxes have risen. I mean, probably the biggest tax rise in decades. Wouldn't it have been better just to be a bit more honest with the British people before the election that taxes were going to have to go up like this?
Well, when I saw you in July, that was after I'd been presented, the first weekend actually, that I was Chancellor, with information from Treasury officials that the previous government had left a £22 billion black hole in the public finances this year and every year into the future. And we've published today the line-by-line breakdown of the hundreds of spending commitments that were unfunded by the previous government. In addition to that, a key commitments around compensating people for the infected blood scandal and the Post Office Horizon scandal. Although those commitments had been made, they had never been factored in to the government's forecast. And finally, the previous government hadn't done a spending review that took us beyond this year. And what we found when we came into office was that none of the plans in departmental spending added up. So I had sort of two choices really, John. The first was whether I wanted to be responsible or not, whether I wanted to just brush all the problems under the carpet like the previous government had done, or whether I wanted to be open and honest and transparent. And the second choice was how I raised that money. And we'll come on to that. I think I've made the right choices in those difficult circumstances to do everything in my power to protect the incomes of ordinary working people.
But even before the election, economic analysts, people who IFS were saying, oh, for God's sake, can everyone be a bit more honest about this? Anyone who comes into power now is going to have to tax more than they originally intended. And you just left yourself kind of next to no wiggle room about it because you'd ruled out the taxes of national insurance on individuals, VAT and income tax.
Yeah, and we've ruled those out because in the last Parliament, living standards stagnated. It was the worst Parliament on record for living standards. And I ruled out increasing those taxes because they are the key taxes that working people paid. And I felt that after the cost of living crisis, the massive spike in mortgage costs, that it was right to try and do everything I could to protect working people. So that has meant that the measures that I've taken today fall on the wealthiest in society and also on business. Those are the choices that I've made. Other people may say those weren't the right choices, but then they have to explain how they would have raised that money. And I don't think you could have raised that money in any other way that wouldn't have affected working people.
OK, let's be clear. You did raise national insurance tax. Leave aside what that does to your conscience on whether you've broken a pledge or not. Tax experts have told us this is one of the worst taxes to increase. On employers, it just discourages hiring, it encourages avoidance, it depresses longer-term wages. Why would you do that? Just to save an election promise, but to make a bad policy?
Well, there were two choices on national insurance. Many people said, given that the previous government cut national insurance based on a false premise, the premise being that the money was there, that what I should have done was just reverse that. I think that would have been the wrong choice, because if I had have done that, all of the burden would have been felt by working people. By choosing to levy the tax on employers, it's then up to employers to find ways to absorb however they can.
That's just disingenuous.
Well,
you will know what the OBR has said, that they've downgraded their forecast for household income because of what has happened to NICs on employers, because fundamentally it does impact people's incomes, and it's just naive to pretend it doesn't.
I'm not saying that it doesn't, Emily, but what I am saying is that the choice was between increasing employee or employer national insurance.
You could have just raised 2p on the income tax altogether. You could have said, do you know
all
what?
Of
that would be a fair tax on everyone.
No, it wouldn't, because all of that burden would have been on working people. The way that I have structured it is that businesses will pay that tax. Now, I accept...
It's not just businesses, it is working people, it's wages, it's increases that they won't see now in their pay packets.
And I accept that some of that burden will be felt on employees. But if I had have increased employee national insurance or income tax, all of the burden would have been felt by working people. And of course, as well as the national insurance changes that I made today, I also increased the employment allowance. So the smallest businesses, 1 million of them, will pay either no more national insurance or indeed less national insurance
Peanuts.
than they were
That's
previously.
Paul Johnson has said that is small beer.
Well, he
in
doesn't run a
comparison.
business, but the Federation of Small Businesses represents thousands and thousands of small businesses, and they've welcomed this. In fact, it's something they've been calling for a long time, and it does mean that the smallest businesses, 1 million of them, will be paying less or no more national
But
insurance.
Chancellor, a friend of mine, he runs a business, employs 40 people, travel consultancy, and he says that the 40,000 extra in national insurance means there will be no annual bonus for the staff. Now, that's obviously directly affecting their incomes because of what you've done on employers' national insurance contributions.
Well, I faced a situation when I became Chancellor in July that there was this massive black hole in the public finances. And the first line of our first mission in our manifesto was to bring stability back to the economy. So I had to put our public finances on a firmer footing. It's not possible to do that without raising taxes in the circumstances that I inherited as Chancellor. I then had to choose how to go about doing that. And what I chose to do was to increase taxes on the wealthiest and on business. Others could make different choices, but I've done everything in my power to protect working people with the choices that I made today.
But you spoke in the budget today about invest. Since you've come in, there's been a pay increase for train drivers without any kind of thing about productivity, stopping all North Sea oil gas exploration, oil licences.
No, that's not.
There'll be employment rights from day one for new staff, hiking national insurance contributions, increasing the minimum wage. It sounds very much like this is a recipe for stagnation and not turning the economy around, because those are all anti-growth measures, aren't they?
2 weeks ago, we hosted this government's first international investment summit. And at that summit, £63.5 billion worth of private sector investment was announced into our economy. Just today, one of the big Canadian funds has invested £1.8 billion in offshore wind in the United Kingdom.
But
and that
these
reflects the fact
measures
that
are
we have
hardly
brought
incentives,
stability
are they?
back to our economy.
Why has
Well,
the OBR downgraded their growth forecast then? If all this stuff is coming at us, why are they telling us today that actually it will start going down? After 2026, we're going to start seeing growth go down.
Well, I'll say a couple of things on that. First of all, for the first time ever, the OBR have produced forecasts looking at what will happen to growth over a longer time period. And they say over 10 years, and I think it is right to look at a longer time horizon, because one of the problems is that politicians often make short-term decisions that fit in with a parliamentary cycle. We don't want to be a government like that. We want to make the right decisions in the national interest
But
for
you
the long
can't
term.
just pick
No,
that
and-
date, Chancellor. You have to look at what's happening in 2 years' time.
Yeah,
where
but-
we hear that growth has peaked and it's going to start coming down.
So we take the next 2 years and they've revised growth up. The following 3 years, growth is not as high as I would want it to be, but then it picks up. And the OBR say today that the measures we're taking can boost long-term growth by 1.4%. That is significant and can make a big difference in people's lives. But is the summit of my ambition the growth forecasts that are published today? Absolutely not. I want the economy to grow faster and stronger. And that's why we're making a number of reforms on planning, on getting people working, on creating skills England, on our pensions reform. We're just getting going on those reforms. And I hope that those growth numbers increase faster. And we've got policies to make that so.
If you don't hit a 2.5% growth target, have you failed?
Well, we said that we wanted to have the strongest growth in the G7. At the moment, we are not achieving
Keir Starmer
that.
said he wanted to see a 2.5% growth rate.
Well, look, our commitment in our manifesto was to have the strongest sustained growth in the G7. At the moment, our economy is forecast by the OBR to grow by 1.1% this year and 2% next year. I want growth to be stronger. And I want that growth to be felt
But won't you
in
set
the
a
living
benchmark?
standards of working people. Well, to compare us with G7 economies. So that's the US, Canada, Japan, Germany, France and Italy. I want us to be top of the pack. There are huge opportunities here in Britain, and the prize is immense if we get this right. If we bring that investment, if we bring that wealth creation to Britain. It was great to see £63.5 billion unlocked just a couple of weeks ago, but I want to do more to get those jobs, get that investment here in Britain. There's a global race. I want the jobs here.
So while we're talking about pledges, can you rule out no more tax rises on working people for the rest of this Parliament, whether it's income tax, VAT, or, as we've seen, national insurance?
Our commitment to those taxes for working people was for the duration of this Parliament, and we will stick by those
So there'll
pledges.
be no raises to income tax for 5 years?
National insurance, income tax and VAT, we won't increase those taxes on working people for the 5 years of this
And what do you
Parliament.
say to people who say one of those has already been broken, so why should we believe the other two?
Well, our commitment in our manifesto was really clear. It was about the taxes that working people paid. We've stuck with those manifesto commitments today, despite the massive black hole in the public finances. I've also committed, Emily, to only have one budget a year. The last government kept coming back every few months with another budget, another fiscal event, another mini budget, and picking the pockets of people every time. I don't want to do that. I've set this budget. That is now there for a year. We won't come back in the spring asking for more money. We want to give business and families the confidence to plan for the future, knowing that tax rates aren't going to be chopped and changed every few months.
So it's one and done.
Employer national insurance could go up again?
Look, I'm not going to tie my hands further than I already have done. But this...
because the others
was
were
a
ruled out.
Yes, well, because
So-
those are manifesto commitments, Emily. And unlike previous governments, we're going to stick to our manifesto
So we could see
commitments.
another hike in
Look,
employers' national
This is a
insurance.
significant budget. It wipes the slate clean. We're not going to need to do another budget like this again. This budget clears up the mess left by the party that sits opposite us now on the opposition benches. It now puts our public finances on a firm footing.
And just to kind of talk about priorities as well in all of this, because you've frozen fuel duty today, which I'm sure will get a cheer from some people, but bus fares are going to be hiked. So it's kind of like you're supporting white van man, but if you're waiting at a bus stop, it's not so good for you. Is that a fair representation or unfair?
That's an unfair representation because the previous government had a cap on bus fares that expired at the end of this year. We've put hundreds of millions of pounds in to extend it for another year at £3 rather than £2. But if we hadn't have put more money into that, bus fares would have gone up to £7, £8, in some cases even £10 in rural areas. We weren't willing to see that, which is why we've capped it for a further year at £3 rather than £2. But that cost taxpayers money to put that cap in place.
And colleagues of yours have been unhappy about the management of this budget process, going above your head, going to Keir Starmer directly, not talking to you about it. Have you found this all a bit more bruising, the kind of difference between opposition and government?
No, I think it's absolutely right that colleagues want to make the Prime Minister aware of the trade-offs and challenges in their areas. That's absolutely right. And it's been a good process in uncovering the unfunded commitments in departments. It has required really difficult choices by all my colleagues when it comes to spending and welfare and taxation as well. I think we've got the balance right. Everybody recognises that the previous government left the country in a mess. Our public finances were in a mess, our public services were in a mess too, and working people had seen their living standards stagnate over 5 years. We're beginning to turn that around. Can't turn everything around in just one budget, but we're making a start.
Lastly, the first thing you did when you took power was announce that cut in winter fuel allowance. It looked like it came out of nowhere. It created a lot of anger amongst a lot of the elderly. 4 months on, people expected to see something in this budget that would speak to their woes, something that would be helpful to pensioners. Not the triple lock, we know that that's still in place. You've seen Age UK say this is massively disappointing. There will be severe consequences for older people. They think 4 out of 5 pensioners. Why didn't you address that when you knew how many people were hurting from it?
I think people can see now that the restricting winter fuel payment to those on pension credit was part of a much bigger package to get control of the public finances.
It doesn't look like it's part of anything. I mean, it doesn't look like it's part of any package that targets the people that are really going to hurt from that. I'm wondering if you think that was a mistake.
Well, I think today people can see that we've had to increase taxes, get a grip of welfare spending, and also make difficult decisions on spending.
So employers and all
payment
people.
Is,
I mean, those are the people that have been hurt, employers and all people.
Well, look, I think there are lots of different parts of government and lots of different people who are having to make, who have seen either taxes increase or difficult decisions on spending. But today we were able to announce an increase in the triple lock, which means that next April the new state pension will go up by £470. But we also increased the level of the pension credit so that for people, the poorest pensioners, you can have an income of around £500 more and still get pension credit. So more people will be able to get pension credit than they were before this budget.
Do you wish you just hadn't left such a long gap between that announcement and this budget? 4 months.
Well, we've got a process in this country that the Office of Budget Responsibility needs a notice period to produce a budget. Now, there was a Prime Minister and a Chancellor who bypassed the Office of Budget Responsibility. That was Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. That put financial markets in turmoil, put pensions in peril, and lifted mortgage costs for millions of homeowners. I didn't do that. I've done this budget in a proper way, made sure all my numbers add up, and that's why it's a budget that today I was able to deliver with confidence.
Chancellor.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you so much.
Well, what did we make of that then?
I thought it was a very self-confident, combative, assertive performance from the Chancellor. Right, you don't like what I've done, what else would you do? We've got to raise this money, how else would you do it?
Yeah.
And I thought that was kind of very direct, and that was very much the challenge she threw down in the Commons.
I tell you what I think is unresolved. What is unresolved is that she will go to her grave talking about working people, and yet everything about the national insurance raise on employers we know will feed in to working people's pockets. And so I just think that is an unsustainable position to carry on saying we've done something that won't touch working people, when, as you said, you read about a text from a friend, it will hurt people's household incomes, that's what the OBR is telling us, and it will hurt people's wage packets, and it may mean that they're not even employed in the first place. If you suddenly decide as an employer, you're thinking, oh, sod that. And, why would I? I'll just go self-employed. Don't need to employ anyone.
Look, I think the central tension that we've got here is that she wants to say, I want to foster growth, I want enterprise, I want investment, I want businesses to be growing like crazy.
Yeah.
At the same time as saying, the people I want to hit hardest in the budget, and she said it in terms, were the wealthiest and businesses. They're the ones that are carrying the burden of this budget. And it's how you resolve that. It's the idea that if businesses are going to be the engine of growth and they've been saddled with additional costs through NI, well, how do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, look, the OBR forecasts were not helpful to her today, let's be honest. And that was why she started talking about 10 years' time. It's all very well, everyone wants to pick their date on the calendar. And of course, we could be looking at next year, which is healthy, or we could be looking at 10 years' time, which might be better. If you start looking at 2026, it definitely looks like it's going down. What are you looking at?
No, I tell you what, of course the OBR forecasts were bad today. I just wonder whether having a whole heap of bad news now is actually really beneficial for you. Because, okay, you're going to get, crap headlines tomorrow and, tough interviews about why isn't the growth going to be bigger. If you exceed it, if you jump over the bar, let's face it.
The bar is low.
The bar is low at the moment. And let's face it, if the Labour government is facing a re-election in, 4 years' time, say, and they've exceeded those growth figures and the investment has come in, then she'll be able to say, well, I told you so. It feels like this is day one of the Labour government. It feels like we finally got started. We've finally seen what Labour means in policy terms, what it means in action. And, there's a big argument to be had now about whether the priorities are right. She seems to be absolutely happy to have that fight.
Yeah, and she was categoric about what this would mean for future budgets. She pledged no tax rises on income tax or on VAT or on national insurance for working people for the duration of the Parliament. But once again, when you ask about employer rises, she sort of started fudging it and go, oh, well, I'm not going to spell out, I'm not going to tie myself. Well, you can't say that. If you've just tied yourself very firmly, and she said, OK, that was in a manifesto, that was an election pledge, a manifesto pledge, but she's not doing that for that. The other thing, I think, which remains unanswered is you can't do private jets are going to be hit, employers going to be hit, hedge funds are going to be hit, and OAPs. The winter fuel thing just sits there and it still makes no sense in the entirety. Yes, they've got the triple lock for pensioners, and yes, if she's trying to send out a signal that, you know, the old, as it were, have had their day and we're investing in the young now, maybe that could be, you know, spelt out. But at the moment, you've got the winter fuel thing just still looks like this weird albatross, right? Which is come from nowhere. It doesn't join up. It doesn't form part of any other policy. And everything else is, as she says, hitting the wealthier.
Yeah, that's an absolutely fair point. The thing that strikes me about Rachel Reeves as Chancellor is that, to put it in old tribal Labour terms, it feels like old Labour. That's not to say Corbyn left-wing. She's not left-wing. She's old right. The old right wing of the Labour Party that we used to be sort of John Speller, John Hammond. It was the right wing union bosses. It's that kind of rather statist approach. It clearly enjoyed saying about, right, I'm going to get, you know, wallop people who get on private jets. It was a kind of working class may not have been used as a phrase, but working people is the new substitute for that.
Well, the biggest cheer of the whole day was the penny off beer.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What does that tell you about us as a nation?
Beer and sandwiches, yeah, and the freeze on fuel allowances.
Yeah.
That will go down well in certain tabloid papers.
Yeah, I mean, she's
tomorrow.
she's declawed, I think, some of the right-leaning press talking points.
Agreed.
Right, that's all gone.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.